Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. As Mika said, this is the 15th review of small literatures, and the third one actually that's focused on the literature from the Arab world, and the final one, and dedicated solely to Egypt, which I think is highly deserved. And tonight with us, the first night with us, are Mansoura Ez-Eldin and Nael el-Toukhi. And they came from Cairo in Berlin to talk to us this evening. Mansoura, just shortly I will introduce them. Mansoura is a writer, a journalist. She's published several novels and short stories collections. Her work has been translated to several languages, and this year she was featured in Beirut 39 project, which features 39 best Arab authors that are younger than 40. And we are very happy to have her with us tonight. And Nael, also writer, journalist, translator from Hebrew to Arabic, and has written several novels and also short story collections. And his work and Mansoura's work was also translated and published in our anthology, and we are very happy to have them translated to Croatian through this project for the first time. I will, once again, really welcome, and we are so happy to have you here. And I will start with, we will also have some readings, and we'll do different kinds of discussions, but I will start with quite a general question, because I think our audience here doesn't have a chance very often to talk to writers from Egypt. So maybe we can start just first, with your thoughts upon being invited here for the review of small literature, and how did you feel? What were your thoughts on being invited to Croatia to come and talk about your work? So maybe just as a short intro into the conversation. Each one of you can answer, whoever wants to start first.
Good evening. I am very delighted to be here tonight with you, and I feel very excited, and I feel at home in your beautiful city. I love this region because I used to love Yugoslavia very much, and I was just in Serbia a month ago. Now I am trying to compare. I feel you are very warm. The culture is very familiar to me. And I am very happy to be with two writers from Egypt that I respect and like their writing. And very thrilled as well to be introduced to Croatian audience.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting us, of course, as well. I was very happy, very happy when I got this email to invite me. I have never been to Croatia or to Serbia or any Slavic culture before. I have never had an interaction with it, so I thought it would be a very good opportunity for me to know a new part of the world and new part of the culture. I think that all the time my dreams that small cultures, comparing to English and French culture, small cultures interact with each other without English mediation or French mediation. And furthermore, when I saw the title of the festival, Small Literatures, I felt more and more happier. That's what I'm dreaming about. So that's it. I like it very much. Thank you.
This is the third year that's dedicated to the literature from the Arab world, and I wanted to hear your thoughts and some comparisons, in terms of Egyptian literature in comparison to the literature from other countries in the Arab world, and do you even like thinking about it in those terms, or do you maybe have some issues with that? How do you feel about categorizing literature this way, and maybe that would be a nice intro into some specifics, maybe in relation to Egyptian literature.
I guess this is a very difficult question to answer. Because if I praise the Egyptian literature, I may come across as praising myself and my colleagues. But honestly, I think that Egyptian literature is the most daring literature in the Arab world, concerning being experimental, being avant-garde, and we have such richness and diversity in our literature. But as well, I see myself as a writer. First and foremost, I don't consider myself as Arab writer or Egyptian writer. I'm just a writer. But at the same time, I feel this is common in Egypt also. In Egypt, Egypt is the center of, one of the centers, but historically, it's very, very embarrassing. This question.
I don't know, but I agree with Mansoura because all the time I like to think about literature and about myself as a writer, as an individual, and that's why I like literature because because you can't speak. It's very difficult to speak about literature of a specific part of the world. You can't just speak about this guy. I like his style, while that guy I don't like. So I don't like classifying writers to their countries. Maybe it's more reasonable for me to classify among their according to their languages. So I am aware that I'm writing in Arabic. That's what I'm thinking about more than I'm an Egyptian writer. Because Arabic is language is a prominent tool in the literature itself. You cannot avoid it. That's maybe I have more thoughts about the language rather than about being Egyptian. Exactly. Yeah. So,
and I think that I believe that like Greek Walcott, I have no nation but imagination. Through writing, I recreate myself and recreate my identity. So it's very difficult to speak about Egyptian literature.
One thing you have in common is that also you both for years have done journalist work, and you've also, as I've heard before, at one point worked together, were colleagues. And I wanted to just briefly, maybe if we could also, before we get into the specifics of your work, if we could also talk a bit about your journalist work and the journalist situation in general in Egypt, because as I guess most of us here know, it's not a very good situation for journalists in Egypt for a long time, and just a couple of days ago we witnessed raids in Madam Nasser in their offices, and it is one of the few independent media outlet that exists in Egypt, and so there are a lot of issues around that, and maybe I think it will be very useful for all of us also to talk a little bit about that.
So yes, I work as a journalist, so that's how I earn money. And I began from Akhbar al-Adab, in which I knew Mansoura long years ago, and we worked together very long while. So, but the place we worked for, Akhbar al-Adab, I think it's a kind of a safe place. I mean, it's a culture magazine, so nobody in Egypt, among the authorities, cares a lot about culture. They don't read it, so they don't understand it, so they don't care about it very much. So it's a kind of a safe place. When it comes to politics, in Madam Nasser, in which I worked also, it's more dangerous. It's more sensitive. So you saw yourself 2 days ago when they raided the office. So I think it's very dangerous profession now, to work as a journalist in Egypt, specifically when you are talking about politics, when you're criticizing the regime, very simply. But people can all the time can make their tricks, individual tricks, to avoid being banned. I mean, even in Akhbar al-Adab, which was a safe place, we could say some things about politics, but in our ways, we all the time you can criticize the regime, not directly, of course, but through some question when you interview some writer or something like all the time you have your own tricks to fulfill what you believe in and to be in a safe a kind of safe place in the same time. So I think everybody works in journalism in Egypt, not the regime supporters, of course. I mean the opposition journalists have their tricks all the time to speak whatever they want, but not in direct speech. Once it comes to the direct speech against the regime, they get crazy. The authorities get crazy, and you see what happened in Mada Masr. It happens all the time. Once you mention the name, maybe of the president, in the case of Mada Masr, it was the son of the president. So that's it, I think so.
Like Nael has said, I'm a book reviewer, and so I write about books and literature. And I think in Egypt, the regime, no one in the regime reads literature, and they are not interested in reading Akhbar al-Adab or novels or short stories, and we are very lucky for that, I think. I talked about Egyptian literature being daring, and I think it's very daring because no one of the regime reads it. So in most cases, they don't know what is written, only by chance. For example, when one of our colleagues, Ahmed Nagy, published an extract from his novel, in Akhbar al-Adab, it was read. And he was jailed for 1 year. So it's like there is no law. Sometimes you are very lucky that no one reads what you are writing, no one from the regime. And but you can't be safe. You can't feel safe all the time when you are in such situation. For me, I used also to write for a Swiss newspaper about politics and about the situation in Egypt. And I guess no one reads what I wrote because it was translated into German and published in a foreign newspaper.
Do you think, now connected to this, since you're saying that nobody from the government, well in most cases, reads these magazines and outlets that are kind of based around culture, do you think they perceive it as not sort of a factor of change or like a potentially dangerous place for ideas, or what is it indicative of? Because, I mean, as you've said, you write about different things, and some of the writing is very, like, explicitly political and very daring, and at the same time, it's sort of not being thought of as important, I guess, in terms of these like, people in power. So what do you think, like, why is there such a relation? Is it a remnant of something? Like, is it something that's connected? Was it always like that? Or did it shift throughout time? What could you now, if you just thought about it, what do you think it is about this? Why is culture not perceived as, politically important?
So, yeah, I think it's not culture. Culture is received as an important, but what culture? I mean, literature, literature is seen as non-important comparing to cinema and TV shows, because it's very, very widely spread. When there's something daring in cinema movie, specifically commercial one, of course, and TV show, they follow it because everybody follows it. So it's the relationship among culture itself is different. And even in literature, I mean, you can find, if it's about how many readers you have. Yeah, I mean, Ala al-Aswani, the most bestseller one, his last novel has been refused in Egypt, refused to be published in Egypt, so he published it in Beirut. So because he had thousands of readers, hundreds of, I don't know what exactly, but I mean, it's not about how good writer he is, but how widely received he is, and how he could say harsh things maybe against the authority. And another example, Ahmed Murad is very widely spread, but he is a regime supporter. I mean, at least he never says anything against the government. So they let him. It's good for that they let him go and publish and being well known and so on. So it's not about literature. It's about how many will read you. I mean, if you can see it on Facebook when there's some post maybe which is very daring against the regime, but just 5 people interacted with it. Nobody will care about it. But if it went viral, they will begin to be more alerted about it. So yeah.
I believe that they also they don't trust literature. For them, it's a sort of it's dangerous. But like Nael said, it depends on the readership. They only fear it when fears the writer when he has a wide readership. If he doesn't have this, they okay, let him talk or write whatever he wants. But in Egypt you can't say anything and feel sure about it. It's very random and everything can happen. So it's like a guessing game only.
So I guess there is this part of achievement, and let's call it achievement, quote unquote, by the government in terms of that there is this element of fear, whether or not, like this idea of possibility that you could end up on the wrong side, end up in jail, or end up being threatened, like no matter what these elements are in terms of leadership and so on, you can never, so I guess that's a tactic in itself that's maybe, proven to be working in some cases. I would now maybe like for Mansoura to read to us her short story, because then we would also talk about the work specifically and get into some other interesting topics. You will have the translation in Croatian, so you can follow it here, and we'll also hear it beautifully read in Arabic. Thank you, Mansoura. It was beautiful to hear it in Arabic. I would like to ask you, since it's very obvious from this story also, but from the other work we had the pleasure to read and translate of yours, you write in a very experimental way, usually very mysterious, very imaginative, very different, I think, from a lot of things we read coming from Egypt, but just in general also. And you said in one of the interviews that you felt kind of afraid when you had to send some of your first work to the publisher. And can you talk about the fears at that point and what were the main, points of your doubt at the time?
For me, fears have always been my best motivations. I think as a child I used to be afraid of everything. I used to be afraid of darkness, from the trees at night. When I see the trees outside our house at night, I used to imagine them as ghosts. For me, every tiny detail, my imagination used to turn it into nightmarish details. It's not something to do with writing, it's the way I see the world. I don't know why. But for me, writing was like not a therapy, but it was like an act of exorcising my fears and my negative energy. For me, it was an act of understanding the world around me. Now I'm not the same person. I guess I'm not the same person, but till now I have my fears, and for me, turning them into art is my way to get rid of them. As for writing, experimental writing, for me, writing is very challenging. I can't continue writing a work if it's not challenging for me. I like to challenge myself, to try to, and sometimes I feel every writer every writer tries to invent something new, but there's nothing new in literature. Sometimes it's like circles. But at the same time, I try to play with the form. I'm interested in form. Subjects or the themes of writing is quite the same. All writers write about fears, about oppression, or about love, but form is the most important thing for me. I am trying to play with forms, and this is why some critics consider my writing as experimental. I can't tell that they are right, but I'm just trying.
In both your work and in your work now, Cairo is kind of a big character, more explicit at some points, more indirect in some other points, and it's an immense, inspiring city, a beast of a city, let's say. And maybe we could, both of you could talk a bit of how the city plays into your work and sort of an homage and understanding of the city that comes through writing about it.
For me, my last novel the plot happened in Cairo, but the one before it, the plot happened in Alexandria, because the two cities I have lived in, so I don't know furthermore cities. Maybe now in Berlin I can speak a bit about Berlin, but not that much, of course, with a profound relationship with Berlin. But I lived most of my life in Cairo, and as me and my family immigrated from Alexandria to Cairo, and for the first, your first impression about Cairo is that it is something suffocating. It's some suffocating city. Because of many reasons, but I think the main reason is the traffic and the benzene and the smell of the benzene in the streets and how to cross the streets. It's inhumane relationship with the human beings. This is my first relationship, and the first relationship of anybody I think who tried to live in Cairo for the first time. But time by time, I begin to discover the beauty of Cairo, if you want. I mean, Cairo is very, very, very wide and very variant. A lot of architectures all over the city, dating from very old ages, beginning from the beginning in the pyramids in Giza, till the Islamic era, till the Romantic era, till the 19th century, the downtown Cairo built in the 19th century, till Heliopolis, which is more new, a lot of kinds of architecture, and you can't see them because of the street, because of the traffic. All the time you are stressful. All the time you hear the taxi drivers cursing each other. You hear people rushing. You see people in a hostile relationship with you. So you cannot see the city But if you want to, if you want to, you will. It's an endless process. I mean, there are some places in Cairo I don't know actually till now. So for me, this chaos thing, this chaos which contains inside it the beauty thing, the beauty spots all the time. It's magnificent for me. It's something very charming for me because I want to. So of course, somebody spend their whole lives without getting out of their neighborhood as if all the places and cannot see the beauty thing. And for me, I can compare between Cairo and Alexandria according to just this point. In Alexandria there is a sea strip, and you see it all the time. It's a very prominent part of the sea vision. You see the sea all the time, which makes you more relaxed. Of course, the blue, the seagull, all the time you hear them and you see them. So the beauty of Alexandria, you can realize the beauty of Alexandria from the first sight. While in Cairo, you have to do your effort to discover this kind of beauty. For me, I used to compare. I used to compare between Cairo and Alexandria. I used to use a metaphor that Cairo is like a cup of tea, while Alexandria is like mango juice, something very sweet, and you can realize its sweetness from the first sip. Or maybe furthermore, comparing between Kulthum, the Egyptian prominent singer, the most prominent one in all over the Arab world, and Fairuz, comparing between Kulthum and Fairuz. Fairuz is more easy to know that this is a very good singer, while you have to do your effort to train yourself, train your taste, to discover the beauty of Kulthum. For me, this is my two metaphors for the relation, for the comparison between Alexandria and Cairo. That's it. That's what I have in my mind about Cairo.
Cairo is not just a city. It's like many cities in one city. I owe Cairo a lot. I moved from the countryside when I was 18 years old and lived on my own in Cairo. And Cairo turned me into another person. I discovered myself in Cairo. I created and recreated myself over and over again in Cairo. I was a girl from the countryside who faced a huge city for the first time, and I felt very tiny, and all the buildings are like giants. So it was like a shock for me. I was alone, but I used to walk the streets of Cairo to get to know the city, to notice its tiny details. I wrote about Cairo a lot. It inspired me in a very surprising ways, but also it gave me some nightmares at first. My experience in Cairo was very rich for me. It was like a space for liberation, for liberating myself. When I came to Cairo, I was quite conservative, and I was veiled. And in Cairo, I went through something like it was like a transformative force for me. I traveled to many cities, but I can't imagine myself living in any other city other than Cairo. I know that it's the famous saying, never say never, but I hope to stay in Cairo because it's very inspiring for me. For me, I wrote about it as a limb of sounds. It's like a noise inventing machine of a city. It's it's very chaotic and very noisy, but at the same time, you after years in Cairo, you feel familiar with this. In the countryside, it's very quiet. I used to stay for days without recognizing noise, but in Cairo, it's quite different. For me, at first it was very stressful, but after that, I get used to it. You know, in Cairo, there is Islamic Cairo and modern Cairo, Masr al-Jadida, or now there is New Cairo, Maadi. And every neighborhood in Cairo has its own independent character. And in Cairo, you always feel at your home, even you are a stranger. Yeah, but I think no one can know his own city. But I was lucky because it wasn't my city. At first, I used to know it or to see it through the eye of the stranger. And the eye of the stranger is always able to notice the contradictions, to get to know the city better. Now I feel that I am sort of blind toward some details in Cairo. And I hope to feel again a stranger in Cairo, just to know it more, or to see it in a clear way.
Well, I think this serves as a nice transition into reading an excerpt from Nael's novel that was translated to Croatian. And I think a great thing in the novel, actually in the excerpt, is the fact that the father of the character of Huria says to her that you can only know a city if you walk around the city, so she gets to know Cairo walking through Cairo. Thank you, Nael. I think, well, here we follow Huria's kind of eventful love life or potential love life, but it is kind of symbolic that things start changing for her rapidly and intensely in 2011. And I think sort of sitting here and talking about Egypt, it's hard not to talk about 2011 and revolution. And I would like to sort of open that topic and to hear from you about now looking back on these events.
About 2011? Yeah. So it's I think it's the most prominent, most important, even what happened in Egypt in 2011 in the last decades. It was a revolution against the Mubarak regimes, which lasted for 30 years, and it ended up with Mubarak stepping down from his position. So it was, technically, it was the revolution won. But aftermath, things got worse and worse and worse. Aftermath in 2012, the Muslim Brotherhood, kind of political Islam, ruled Egypt for 1 year. And aftermath came the military coup in 2013 to make them step down, and they're ruling now, the military ruling now. So, I think everything changed in 2011, that the relationship between people and each other, between them and the streets and the squares, specifically, of course, Tahrir Square, people will sit in which the revolution happened. I think the people got free from inside in this year. A lot of phenomena happened since then, telling about all the topics, all the unspoken topics have been opened again in 2011. Maybe gender, political Islam, Israel, everything. It was unspoken, and it started to be kind of the public debate. But the most important for me is not the 2011 itself, but the period between 2000, maybe 2005 and 2004 till 2011. I think in these years, in these 7 years, happened. There was the seeds of the revolution. I mean, the blogs, for example, which was very, very important for me. The blogs had bloggers began to post in this time, 2004, 2005, and began to open the unspoken topics also about gender, about political Islam, about everything. In the same time, the opposition in Egypt in the last decades was just against American and Israeli imperialism, but in 2005 it began to be against Mubarak itself, our local dictatorship through Kifaya movement which is called Kifaya. Mubarak was, in the same time, the president was so relaxed after 25 years of ruling Egypt, so he permitted, he allowed some independent newspaper to come out. So these newspapers like Al-Masri Al-Yom, Stur, began to criticize him. So the country was changing in these 6 or 7 years. I mean, the online and offline newspapers and blogs and in the streets, and so I think for me, and this is the only thing, one of the things I'm very proud about it, that about the political Islam, because the 2011 revolution was like an earthquake. Everybody was inspired by it, and it was secular. The slogans were secular, even if Muslim Brotherhood participated in it, but the slogans itself were secular, and the demands of it were secular. So everybody in the coming years after 2011, everybody began to be influenced by this new and fresh atmosphere. For me, the most symbolic thing is that girls and women began to take off their hijabs. So women was taking on hijabs during 30 years, and in just few years, out of inspiration of the secular atmosphere, they began to take off the hijab. The elite has expanded very, very, very widely among all of Egypt. Everybody, a lot, more and more people now are reading novels and discussing novels and going to cinema. Not necessarily good novels, but start reading and starting watching cinema, independent films, not necessarily also good ones, but they start to be part of the discussions in Egypt. So for me, that's why I consider it one of the most important thing happened in Egypt in the last decades. Now things are very, very, very bad, the situation, but I argue that everything got better, but in economics and in politics. According to society, in society terms and in culture terms, I think it got very, very better. Not necessarily the quality, but the range of the people. The people are discussing everything, and all the time, when I was in Egypt, I hear among average men, among average people, I hear something which I wasn't supposed to hear out of them in the last years. About economy, there's something very, very, very important happened in sense of the awareness of things, not in the things itself, not in the oppression. I think that it's in the political situation, it's worse, much worse than Mubarak's days. But the awareness of things, the conscious about things, the relationship between, which is very significant for me, between women and their bodies, the harassment, sexual harassment discussions, everything has been changing in these years. except politics and economy. So, yeah.
Before 2011, I used to complain that nothing is happening in my country, nothing changes. But beginning from 2011, I felt that I'm unable to follow up the changes. It was like being in a storm or something like this. For me, 2011 is the most important year in my life. During this year, we felt that we are the center of the world. We can touch the sky and play with stars. And so when this dream turned into a nightmare, it was very difficult for us. Many friends were very depressed. They couldn't accept what happened. Do you remember the opening of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens? I used to feel that this opening is very ridiculous. But beginning from 2011, I began to understand it. It does make sense to me. Beginning from 2011, for us, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
I would like to also, I mean, we've been talking for a while now. I would like to give a signal to our audience if you want at any point ask anything or comment on anything. I think this sort of also opens up a general discussion, and if you feel, of course, Revija.
Actually, I'm going to ask first. Go. Thank you, especially for the last, it was very inspirational, the last bits. I was there in Tahrir, so I know that you actually touched the sky those days, so it was amazing, really. And I know about the depression that followed, which also happened in Turkey after Gezi. It was a brief time for my country and for your country that we were not embarrassed anymore, but we were for the first time proud, and I didn't even know how that word felt for a country. I didn't have such a relationship with my country. But my question would be, for a brief time, it was a proud moment, it was a secular moment, and so on. But Arab language, especially for the outsiders, is contaminated a lot with religion. It is the language of the Islam, and Islam is also like as if they're entangled to each other, especially for the people who are not Arab, who are not Muslim. So do you think after 2011, after that secular crack, if you wish, is there a way out of this, monopoly of religion on Arab language?
I have an answer for this. Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I don't run the show, so.
I don't know who this Well, Yasser Abdelatif is a writer, a journalist, a translator, and he'll be speaking tomorrow evening with us here, but of course, you're highly welcome to say here.
The big sign of this liberation for the Arab language from Islam and the impact of Islam started exactly that time, around the revolution, and maybe 10 years before, and this time we started to have more and more, for example in Egypt, more and more Copts, Christian Egyptian writers. That was rare before. In every generation we used to have one brilliant Coptic writer, for example Salama Musa, and then Luis Awad, and then Edward Kharrat. Every generation had only one maybe Christian writer in Egypt, only in Egypt. Maybe in Syria and Lebanon, the position is different because they have the Christian are not really minorities in Lebanon or in Syria. It's a big community. Nowadays, we have more and more Coptic writers. This is significant, and also what is very significant to me that there's a small new country appeared south to the Egypt, south to Sudan, which is south of Sudan Republic, who gained the independence 2011 exactly. Before I don't remember the time exactly, but it was around the uprising of 2011 in Egypt and in Syria and in the area. After a referendum, they chose to be separate from the northern Sudan, which was dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood. And those people of the South Sudan are really, they are not Arabs. They are not, they don't see themselves as Arabs. They speak a very specific type of Arabic or version of Arabic. They call it the Arabic of Juba. We were talking about this yesterday. And now those people in South Sudan, the literary expression used to be till that time in English. They saw themselves as an Anglophone people, and the famous writers who came from there, they were the educated people, the doctors and engineers and professors of the university. They were all Anglophone and they speak English and they write in English. Now there's a movement after the independence, and after they became a real sub-Saharan country, which doesn't belong to the Arab League. They start writing in Arabic, and this is strange. And within the cultural events in the Arab countries, like in Lebanon or in Egypt, they start to appear. Some novelists from southern Sudan, which they're not, and they start to express in Arabic. They are not Muslim, and they are not Christian. They have sometimes some of them are Christian. Most of them have their old African traditions and rituals. And even if they're Christians and some of them are Muslims, this is very pale version of Christianity and Islam. The African tradition is still there. I feel that such a movement will liberate. Such a movement could participate in this process of liberation of the Arab culture from the impact of Islam, because the Arab language is it's a big language. It's horizontally spread on the map of the world on it's big, huge spaces and different countries and different cultures. Such movements could participate in this act of liberation from the impact. When you have a lot of Christians, they are not Muslims, and those Africans and other Amazigh, these minorities, I think they will enrich the Arabic expression with the different cultures.
Thank you.
I spoke a lot, so.
If you would like to also maybe refer to that question.
I think this is a very important issue for every Arab writer. I remember 9 years ago I was in Mexico, and a Mexican writer asked me, how does it feel to write in Arab? I didn't understand his question. Oh, like you writing in Spanish. He wasn't satisfied with my answer. And after that, I understood that he was asking about Arabic as a very old language. Yes, as a language that is considered in the Arab world and Islamic world as the language of God, the language of paradise. So I began to think about this. And I felt that I can't own this language. I can't be there in using it. Because how could we mortals be daring when we deal with a language that is considered as the language of God or the language of paradise? It's very frightening. But I think that writing literature is a way of liberating this language. So in the Islamic culture, the traditional Islamic culture, men of cloth used to despise storytellers. If you are familiar with all the Islamic culture, they used to hate storytellers because they knew that storytellers could liberate this language. So I feel that writing and literature, poetry, and is the only way to liberate the Arabic language.
Yeah, I agree with Yasser and Mansoura, of course, but I want to add that the process happened, the revolution moment itself, when it freed us from inside, and specifically in our relationship with the language, because there is the issue, of course, in Egypt and all the Arabic-speaking countries, the tension between standard Arabic and spoken dialects. And it's unsolved problem, and I don't think it will be solved soon. But at least I remember in my childhood the hegemony of English. I mean all the chic supermarkets or the chic shops. They named themselves in English to look more cool and more trendy. Now it's the opposite. It's extremely the opposite. To be cool is to name your shop in Arabic.
And graphic T-shirts with
exactly. So if you are familiar with Egypt, there is restaurant Zuba, Hassan, Sofra, a lot of Arabic names, and it's their way written in English alphabet, of course, and they put a lot of effort to be pronounced by English speakers or foreigner person properly, so they don't put the controversial letters and controversial sounds. But it's something about being trendy now is to use Arabic. I remember also when we began to use keyboards. I mean through internet, when we began to use internet, it was very common to use something we called Franco-Arab, which is Arabic with the English alphabet. Now it looks very old-fashioned thing. It's now you just write in Arabic or in Egyptian dialect, and that's it. So I think the revolution helped us to solve our relationship with Arabic, specifically with secularizing Arabic, with getting rid of the Islamic associations of it, and to try to invent all the time, new words just to help you in translation. Of course, of the technology terminology, but also in gender technology. All the time you will find language geeks who discuss with each other what term would be more suitable to translate this term, and a lot of competition between themselves and each other. So I think this is a very good sign, and it came out of pride. All the slogans in Tahrir Square were written in Arabic, so maybe it was a kind of, so Arabic is not old-fashioned as we thought. So it could help in solving contemporary issues and so on. So Yeah, that's it. I think it helped us getting rid of the holiness of the language and try to make it try to think about it in a contemporary way. So yeah.
Thank you.
Mika, do you still have your question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Mansoura, no, I think I can yell loud enough, sorry. I wanted to ask actually Mansoura about her relationship to Kafka. Because of, I mean, I don't know if that's like a lifelong relationship or
One night stand.
or one night stand. But in the several short stories that we translated, there is a presence of, there is a ghost.
Yes,
Ghost
life.
Yeah, ghosts in each of the stories. The ghosts are different, but they're there. But also, your novel actually takes place in front of Kafka's house in Prague.
Yes.
And one more thing that I found, read through your text that we were able to read, is this conspicuous absence of the perspective of one. So the reader is always shifted, and the reader is also almost in a kind of earthquake, because you never know from which perspective the story is told, who is telling the story, and what the story is about. So that's also very Kafkaesque in a way. So.
Kafka is one of my favorite writers, along with Bruno Scholz and Gombrowicz. I noticed that I prefer writers from East Europe and Russia and East and Central Europe. I don't know why, but I began writing this way before reading Kafka. I got to know Kafka when I was in the university, or maybe after university. When I began writing this way. So maybe I like Kafka because I felt that there is some things in common in our view of the world. Not because I read him and I wanted to follow his steps. This nightmarish aspect in my writing belongs to my own heritage. I was born in the countryside, and I lived there for 18 years of my life. And I used to hear a lot of fairy tales and folkloric tales from the Nile Delta area, and most of these tales are full of ghosts and genies, and and as I told you before here, that I was very afraid of everything when I was a child. So maybe I began writing this way out of fear. As for the relationship with Kafka after I have read him, I felt that he represents me in some way or other. But along with Kafka, I also love Jorge Luis Borges, as you pronounce it. His name is in Spanish and Arabic, Jorge Luis Borges, and Julio Cortázar and many other writers. I like writers who are trying to alter reality. I prefer to mix reality with dreams, reality with nightmares. I remember that Juan Rulfo once said that literature could only be literature if it managed to alter reality. Because for him, reality was so limited, so it needed to be sustained through imagination. I do believe in this too. For me, writing is something about inventing other words. Life is very complicated. when someone tells me a story or something that happened to him, I naturally think of another point of view. And this is why I'm trying in my writing to represent a lot of views. As for Shadow Specters that you have read, I tried to write it at first out of anger. After the revolutions in the Arab world, everyone was like teaching writers how to write. You should write about the revolutions. You should write what is happening. I feel that's very old-fashioned. No one can tell a writer what to write and how to write. If I wanted to write about politics or revolution in a direct way, I can write non-fiction. But for me, I wanted to stay free, to write what I want. So I told myself I'll try to write a novel that is only a game. It's about games. But I felt after that I was quite naive, because when you live in very violent and cruel era, you can't avoid being haunted by this. When I began writing and I discovered that the novel is very playful and very post-modern, but it was haunted with the horrors of what is happening. It's about massacres, it's about drowning. I feel that I transformed what the ruins around me into another shape and another thing. So I tried to write without thinking of anything. I tried to ignore that other people may read it. This is why I love this novel. If I may, if I'm allowed to like one of my novels, I like this one because I felt free while writing it.
I would have one question, and also if somebody else has, you can raise your hands. But I don't want to miss a chance to maybe ask this. Nael, before you said that 2011, we look at it as this formative year, but it had many things happening in the years before it that sort of were the seeds for the revolution. And it wasn't only about the media and these alternative news outlets and blogs and so on. It was also about many other things that were happening offline. You had in Egypt many important workers' movements and factory blockades and so on, a lot of things that happened that sort of made people be more aware and involved around different social issues. And you also said that after 2011, what you felt as a change is that a lot more people were consuming culture in different ways. So you said it might not be something that you consider good quality content, but more people seeing films, reading books, and so on. So that's in terms of the consumption, let's call it that way. What about the creation? Was the space opened up for more people that from diverse backgrounds, whether diverse class backgrounds, diverse gender, whatever? Did the space for the creation of different cultural content, did that space open up after 2011?
After 2011.
Yeah.
So of course, a lot of literature was written just after 2011, and maybe due to 2011. I want to answer your question and to add to Mansoura also that about the 2011 and in 2011 and 2012, it felt very stressful that everybody is obsessed with writing literature about revolution. Even specifically Europeans asking Egyptian writers, where are the revolution in your novels? How can we locate it? I also say it. I also make fun of this demand and of this kind of search for example, me and Ahmed Nagy and Muhammad Rabia and Basma Abdelaziz, we are considered in one group, and it's about the dystopia thing. So all the Europeans ask, it was invented by Europeans and Americans, that there is some dystopian literature happened in Egypt due to the failure of the revolution and so on.
And no one writes in other way.
Yeah, of course. And mostly of the time they didn't read but one work of one writer, and they find some I don't know, some depression in one chapter, so they and immediately they run to the term dystopia, and because I imagine myself in their place. I have no idea. For example, if I have no idea about Arabic literature and I once read one Egyptian novel, so I will run very soon to the conclusion that I didn't read just a novel but a trend. It's a new trend invading Egypt, the dystopia thing, and more and more sexy. It's connected to the revolution, to the failure of the revolution. This is how journalistic titles were made in the Western journalism, I think. While it's very, it's maximum 4 works among the whole Egyptian literature which was written after revolution. But for me, the most important thing happened in the literature after revolution, not the dystopian, the pseudo-dystopian thing, but the non-fiction literature. I can count now, since 2011 till now, about 10 titles, 10 books, non-fiction books, which is written in a kind of testimony, a kind of analyze, a kind of, anyway, which went very viral and with a very good quality. So I think, yeah, for me, the non-fiction is winning a lot of areas from the fiction thing, from the literature, and the question is the question is whether this non-fiction could be considered as literature or not, because it's non-fiction, but it's written in a very poetic way and very thoughtful way, and so on. So maybe it's something it's not about the revolution itself, but about our awareness of reality. That is, the reality is as if we discovered that there is reality. That because of the Facebook, because of the social media, everybody is posting something from any countryside in Egypt. So we all the time since 2011 we see new parts and fresh parts of the reality. So a lot of people wanted to comment this. It applies also for cinema, the documentary films versus fictional films. Documentary films winning a lot of areas. It never happened before. As if we are astonished that how big our lives is. It's not about imagination. It's as if the imagination is postponed right now. Now let's document, and aftermath we'll look as if imagination is a kind of luxury right now. So it's the non-fiction literature and the documentary films are referring to something very important happened, that before 2011 we didn't know each other. We didn't know the country we lived in. As if everything now is exposed to us, as if we see ourselves from the beginning. So maybe that's my thoughts about it.
May I add something also? Of course. Also, the expression of minorities after 2000, as I said before, that we have more and more Coptic Christian writers. We have more and more female writers, way more than before. Like in my generation, there was Imam Mersal, the only and the one, and another one older than us called Fatma and Dee. Now there's the poetic movement. It's all of consisting of girls and young women. Gay literature, it appeared in a very strong expression now, and daring. Before, in the 90s, we had a friend, writer, who was a train conductor and gay at the same time. He wrote a very strong novel about the gay life in the railway life. And he couldn't publish it because it was very strong, stuff and never. And it was written in dialect, in dialect Egyptian, and in one sentence without full stops or
دم فاسد أو حاجة تانية.
لا after دم فاسد was called علبة الليل المعدنية. And he couldn't, but even Muhammad Hashim, our publisher, who was very daring at the time, he couldn't publish it. He was very brave. He couldn't publish it because it would put him in jail and put the writer in jail. But now we have a writer like Muhammad Abdel Nabi, who wrote a very well-known gay novel called In the Room of the Spider. And he reached the short list of the Booker Prize, the Arabic Booker Prize. And also there's gay, not gay, what do you call it? Queer literature movement appeared in Palestine. Which is very, very strange. That within a place full of conflicts, political conflicts, you have this movement. Plus those this African Arabic writing, and this the voices of minorities and the oppressed voices of all the history, the Arabic history. Now they're starting having voices more and more. Thank you.
I think we would have to finish for tonight. We've been here for, almost more than 2 hours. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks to our dear guests. We'll continue tomorrow. We'll have a great and fruitful discussion. I hope so, with Yasser and with Ahmed Rafat. And we'll talk about films and literature, and of course connected to the wider social environment. Thank you so much.